Well, I'm Chris, my wife Nancy. We're happy to be here with you, happy to be able to spend time with you, and really a trial by fire, so it's kind of fun. I only get one shot at this, so better make it count. So I asked myself, and then, what would I want to preach about? This is my one chance to preach to this congregation. What would I want to preach about? The answer is obvious, is Jesus. It's Jesus. Jesus is always the answer. So I tried to develop that thought. What is it about Jesus that I would want to communicate, that I want you to walk away with? What is it about Jesus that I'm so passionate about that I can't help but share, I can't help but talk to you about it? And so I thought about the various answers. Who is Jesus? Maybe we should talk about who is Jesus. We can talk about the hows of Jesus. How did Jesus do this? How does Jesus act and work for us? But I didn't settle there. I didn't stop there. Instead, I wanted to ask a different question. And a question that I want to leave you with, a question that I want you to be able to answer, maybe not tonight after this dizzying sermon, but on your own time. And the question is, where is Jesus? That's the question that I want to leave you with. Where is Jesus? And I had to ask myself that question a long time ago. I had to ask myself that question because I was always told, give the same answer, He's here in your heart. Jesus lives right here in your heart, and He's in heaven. And that's the answer that, honestly, I give to my 4-year-old. Where is Jesus now? He's in heaven, and He's here in your heart. But I wanted that tactile response. I wanted to know where Jesus is. And so I examined this question, and I examined this concept, and I examined it in the order of who is Jesus? What is Jesus? What was Jesus? How did Jesus impact me? And all of that led me to this, to answer this question, where is Jesus? And I have an answer. And it's 3 words, and it is, He stands between. That's where Jesus is. He stands between. So I want to look at that this evening. I almost said this morning. It's habit. We do that this evening. And I want to be able to answer that question, where is Jesus? He stands between. And so I want to give us a frame of reference for that. And so I want to talk about Secret Service agents. I have a little bit of a fascination with this idea of Secret Service. Those gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen who are so dedicated and so official in their role to protect our highest ranking officials, that they will step in front of a bullet to protect that person. They will lay their life in between. And so I wanted to research the idea of being a Secret Service agent. So I did what was natural, and I watched In the Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood. I figured that's the perfect bit of research, and then I watched the movie Dave. Now, you may not have known this movie. If you know this movie, you probably love this movie. It's a fantastic comedy, but it's a great research tool. The movie Dave, of which we're going to talk a little bit about here, is about a man named Dave. It's not a clever name. His name is Dave. He looks just like the president. And so he's just a normal guy, lives in Washington, D.C., and he works to get people jobs. That's his whole role, that's his mission, that's his passion, is to find jobs for people. It just so happens that he looks exactly like the president. Well, the president falls under a serious medical condition, and they need somebody to play the president and be the president. So they enlist Dave to become the president, they say for just a short while. And they coach him, and they make him and put him in place in the White House as the President of the United States. All the while the Chief of Staff making all the decisions. Well, there's a scene in the movie. Dave is late at night eating a sandwich in the White House kitchens. And he's sitting there with his Chief Secret Service officer. And so he's trying to get answers from him, and he's trying to dissect, what really would you do? And Dave comes to this realization. He looks at this Secret Service agent and says, you have to take a bullet for me. And it's this moment where Dave just happily starts chewing his sandwich, and he's off dreamy, thinking, my life is now protected. But you see, the camera turns to the Secret Service agent, and you see this realization come to his face. And there's an internal battle that he has to face. Do I take a bullet for this man? Do I take a bullet really for this idiot? Is really kind of what he's thinking. And so we have this battle that we get to witness between these two men and Dave pretending to be the president. And so the movie progresses, and it's a comedy, so there's some funny stuff, there's some really heartwarming stuff, there's some embarrassing stuff. But the end of the movie comes about, and Dave works out a way to turn the country over to the vice president, who's a good man. And so we're in this next to final scene of the movie, and they're sitting in an ambulance, and the Secret Service agent looks over him and says, Dave, I'd have taken a bullet. And you're just, oh, that's so sweet, it's wonderful. The Secret Service, their role is to stand between any threat and our highest elected officials, because it's their job. And when the rubber meets the road, that's where you will find a Secret Service agent, standing between, because it's their job. Jesus stands between because love. Because of unbridled, passionate love for you and me. He stands between. It's not as though his reputation is based on it standing between us and whatever threatens us. It's not as though his honor is on the line. He stands between because of love. Most famous verse in the Bible shows up at football games, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. John 3:17 takes that further and answers the question, where is Jesus? God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. He stands between. Now what gets overlooked in John 3:16, and this is a realization I had not too long ago. I would have thought John 3:16, that profession that Jesus makes here, that he's making this statement, and John makes this statement and builds up this most famous verse of the Bible, that it belongs in like this grand address, much like the Sermon on the Mount. But John 3:16 is not delivered to the masses of believers. It's said to Nicodemus at night in a secret meeting. And it's communicated in this intimate way. And he declares to this, who will ultimately prove one of the antagonists of our story, of Jesus, a Pharisee, the most profound truth and victory this world has ever seen. And from the very beginning, no matter the audience, no matter the setting, no matter the circumstance, Jesus is very clear. He stands between. And in this moment, whether it's that moment in that nice dark area with Nicodemus, whether it's in this moment here on a Wednesday night in Greenville, South Carolina, he makes it clear that he stands between God and man, bridging the gap of judgment with his sacrifice. God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. So that's John 3. And as we continue to look for Jesus, where is Jesus? And we want to answer that question, Jesus, where are you? And he says, I'm standing between. We can do a survey of the Gospel of John, my favorite Gospel, in case you were wondering. It's his favorite Gospel, it's John. John chapter 4, we see another example of where Jesus stands between. John chapter 4, the Samaritan woman at the well. And we see Jesus standing between something altogether different, but something that's very relevant to us now. Jesus stands between cultural prejudice that have separated and have locked down that region for generations and generations and generations. So much so that Jews call the Samaritans dogs. So much so that when the Samaritan woman is addressed, she's startled. You're not supposed to be talking to me. And here we see Jesus. We get to experience Jesus again, standing between cultural prejudice, hate, racism, whatever you want to call it. We find Jesus again standing between that and the one he loves, because he loves. John chapter 6. The feeding of the 5,000. This story is in every gospel. I really like John's account of it. It's my favorite gospel, in case you're wondering. John chapter 6. John accounts this miracle because what this does is this telling of the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000 gives us insight into how Jesus taught his disciples and how Jesus taught that he stands between. And in this example here, Jesus stands between our fear of just not having enough. We call it the fear of lack. And we find Jesus very, very tangibly standing between our fear of lack or not having enough. He looks over at Philip and says, "Feed them." And what does Philip say? "We can't afford it." Paraphrase, Chris. But Philip takes our role in the story. He says, "We'll never have enough. Jesus, we don't have enough to feed them. What do you want from me?" He's afraid. And Jesus stands between that genuine, relevant, very real fear of lack, not having enough, and he provides in excess. He stands between. My favorite example, second favorite example, in case you're ranking it. John chapter 8. John chapter 8. Maybe one of the more famous stories in the Gospel of John. He stands between the law and the sinner. It's the story of the woman caught in adultery. And here we physically get to see Jesus move. We get the description of Jesus' posture. We get the description of actually where Jesus physically stood in this story. And we get to see Jesus stand between the stones and the one to be judged guilty and killed. This is the foremost example here of compassion trumping law. You see, the crowd was right. The crowd was right. She deserved to die based on the law. She deserved death according to the law. Now, what I like most about this story, and it's something that I never really fully realized until I asked this question, where is Jesus? We can look at the posture of Jesus. And when Jesus is addressing the crowd, he's standing. And he's physically standing between them and the woman caught in adultery, the sinner. And after he asked this question, where is Jesus? He stooped down on her level. Now, I used to be so fascinated. What was Jesus writing in the dirt? That's all I wanted to know about the story. What is Jesus writing in the dirt? Is he writing their names with their sins? Is he calling out somebody? And I came to this idea, and maybe a realization, that it's not so much about what Jesus was writing in the sand. It's this, that when the rocks flew, they were going to hit Jesus first, because he was on her level. You see, at this point, Jesus didn't just stand between, but he crouched between. He huddled between. And we see Jesus on her level, standing between the sinner and the law. Protected. Because he loves. John chapter 11. Story of Lazarus. Maybe the most pointed and easy to identify moment where Jesus stands between something that we are terribly afraid of. Not so much our fear of not having enough, like feeding the 5,000. We'll never be able to provide for these people. But our fear of actual loss of life. Martha, if you were here, he would not have died. If you were here, my brother would not have died. Jesus, you could have stopped this. I wouldn't have to face this loss, this pain, if you were here. Where's Jesus? And we see in this moment again, Jesus standing between something that terrifies all men. Death. When he calls Lazarus out of the tomb, he shows us the power that he possesses. The power he possesses And we get to witness the promise of eternal resurrection in just that one small moment. Where is Jesus? He stands between me and certain death. And He is calling my name out of the tomb. He's calling your name out of the tomb. Where is Jesus when you're crying and broken and hurt and wishing you were dead, or maybe you have lost everything? He stands between you and the tomb, calling your name. John chapter 19. Where is Jesus? He's broken, beaten, spit upon. He's bleeding, blood running into his face. He's mocked with a sign above his head. He has taken his place on the altar for us. And we see Jesus not so much standing, because I'm not sure he had the physical power to stand in this moment. Where is Jesus? In that moment, as he allows himself to be broken and nailed to two roughly cut pieces of wood, mocked by soldiers, mocked by bystanders, weeping, thirsty. He is right there with every ounce of divine power between me and absolute, utter hopelessness. As my sacrifice, as my Savior, as my Messiah, as my King. He stands there, or hangs there, willingly between the condemned and condemnation. It's not because it's his job, it's because he loves. Finally, my favorite chapter in the New Testament, John chapter 21. Again, in case you're keeping track. John 21. Where is Jesus? Where is Jesus? He's standing on the shore in this moment, in this chapter. He's standing on the shore as Peter and the rest of the disciples are lost. Absolutely lost. They don't know what to do. This should speak to every guy in the room, maybe. They don't know what to do, so what does Peter decide? Let's go fishing. Solves all the problems. But he knew, Peter went to somewhere that he knew he was comfortable with. They got in a boat and they went fishing. And they're lost. Not only are they lost, at this moment they're not discipling anyone, they're not teaching, they're not preaching, they've been hiding behind locked doors for hours, unsure of what comes next. And where do we find Jesus? Standing on the shore in a wonderful bookend of the gospel, saying, "Gentlemen, friends, have you caught any fish?" My favorite moment in this is Peter, without thinking, jumps out of the boat and swims to shore. I love that John includes this story, because I imagine when Peter, fully dressed, jumps out of the boat, swims to shore, the other guys hurried up and got to shore, and they all hop out of the boat, bone dry, going to sit around the fire, and there's Peter, sopping wet, kind of just standing there. And so it's silent. You're waiting for what Jesus is going to do. Jesus is cooking fish. Nobody's speaking, because here the resurrected Christ is here. Everybody's looking at Peter, soaking wet, knowing that the bomb was about to drop. Because the last time that Jesus saw Peter, I don't know him. I don't know this man. A curse on me if I'm with him. That's the last time that Jesus and Peter were together. And Jesus was broken and crucified. And everyone knew, because this happened before, this is a teaching moment, Peter, here it comes. They were waiting for that word to come from Jesus to Peter. Where is Jesus in that moment? Is he there with a finger waiting to say, "Peter, how dare you? Peter, you better try harder next time. Peter, I want you to make a resolution now, as I'm about ready to rise up into heaven, that you're never going to do that again." No. Where do we find Jesus? Calmly, sitting next to Peter, making fish for his friends, cooking fish for his friends. He's between guilt and redemption. He doesn't shake his finger at Peter. He simply says his name, which at that moment you could hear a pin drop, I'm sure, or just hear the water dripping off of Peter. He says, Peter, do you love me? And that's all it took for us to find Jesus in this moment. Jesus does not give this great sermon. He does not go on and give us this memorable verse like John 3:16 like he did with Nicodemus. He just asked him one question 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me? And in this moment we see Jesus standing between the guilt that every one of us carries and the redemption and hope that he offers. In his resurrection and in this moment sitting around that fire, Jesus stands between, even for Peter, even for Chris. So you have to ask this question. Where is Jesus? Where is Jesus? You have to ask. He stands between. He hasn't moved in any of these places. He is there between you and condemnation. He is standing there between you and whatever prejudice or hate or cultural barriers that you may carry with you. He is there standing between you and your fear of lack. He stands between the law that condemns us all and the sinners that we are. He stands between us and that great fear of death. He stands at the outside of the tomb calling our name over and over again. He stands between us and absolute, utter hopelessness as the ultimate sacrifice. And he stands between us, our guilt, and our redemption. The question we have to answer, not so much is, where is Jesus? But will we allow Jesus to stand between? You see, he's not going to force himself in front of us. He's not going to force himself or push us aside. He's waiting to move closer, ready to place himself between each of us and what awaits if we don't align with him. Better than any Secret Service agent that may do so out of duty, maybe he might do so out of honor. He is ready to lay down his life between you and the sin that condemns you. Whatever it is that you think, I think, might separate us from God, know that it is not so great a chasm that hasn't already been bridged. Why? As he stands between. You will pray with me now as we close. This is your invitation. If you want to come forward, so be it. We can pray. Let's join me in prayer. God, you are amazing. We are in awe of your love, the depth of your sacrifice for us, the power of the cross, the power of your voice outside the tomb, calling Lazarus out of death, out of that final defeat that they thought had taken. God, we are in awe of the beauty of the cross, that terrible vehicle of death. We are in awe. Father, forgive us for being distracted. Forgive us for being weary in this journey. Forgive us for being afraid of not having enough. Thank you for standing between. Thank you for the cross that gives us hope. Thank you for the empty tomb that gives us victory over death. Shows us your power. Thank you for your Son. And it's through him we pray together. Thank you.
At this time, we've got some refreshments back there. I'd like for it to be a time where we sort of just mingle. Many of you have not had the opportunity